just about to send to Twitter, oh good, I started 30 seconds and I chose now to get nervous. So if someone could retweet that for me, that would be great. My name is Wil Wheaton. I was an actor for the first part of my life, and I've been a writer for the rest of it. And I'm here today to share with you a couple of stories from my newest book, The Happiest Days of Our Lives. And maybe when I finish with this stuff, I might have time to read you a piece that my wife has begun referring to as my freebird. So, I'm just gonna get started. This is a story called Beyond the Rim of the Starlight. Shortly after we began production on Next Generation, people who had been associated with the series for a long time, actors, creative department heads, producers, and writers mostly, asked us if we'd been approached about going to conventions to promote the show. The rest of the cast didn't know what a Star Trek convention was, but I did, because I'd been attending comic book and horror conventions since I was in the 6th grade, and my parents gave me permission to go to the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors convention at the Ambassador Hotel, which the city of Los Angeles thought was an awesome idea to tear down and replace with a school. Thanks, City of LA. Conventions are awesome, I said at the end of a table read when the subject came up. There's all these people, and you can watch movies, and you can buy cool stuff, and I bet you they would let us in for free. I was a naive 14-year-old, and it didn't occur to me that if the adults in the cast spent one of their days off promoting the show, they would expect compensation that was a bit more substantial than free admission. If you're unfamiliar with Star Trek conventions, and I seriously doubt that anyone in this room is,
I've never actually been to one.
this primer from my book, Just a Geek, may be helpful. Conventions, or cons, as they are known among people who are too busy to say conventions, are part trade show, part collectible show, and part geek fest. It all adds up to a celebration of everything related to Star Trek, and the atmosphere is always festive and exciting. Promoters hire actors, writers, producers, and others from the show to give lectures, answer questions, and sign autographs for the fans. There are other sci-fi and fantasy-oriented people who show up to sell collectibles, bootlegs, and merchandise. The organizers usually run episodes of Star Trek on a big screen, and there are always costume contests. Oh, the costume contest. Think Rocky Horror Picture Show. But with less drag and more singing. In Klingon. The first time I was on stage at a Star Trek convention, it was in Anaheim, right around the time Next Generation started. I wasn't there officially, but my friend and I had gone to check it out, so that when I was told to attend cons in the future, I'd know what I was getting into. Star Trek conventions, he informed me, were very different from the comic book and horror movie conventions I was used to. The promoter found out I was wandering around the show, after I paid my admission, of course, and offered me the glorious sum of $100 in cash to speak for an hour. To a 14-year-old who thought an $8 admission refund was a jackpot, $100 sounded an awful lot like $1 million. Without knowing how badly I was being ripped off, the average person who speaks at a convention earns between $5,000 and $10,000 for their time, with captains commanding sums in excess of $25,000. I gleefully accepted his generous offer and did my best to answer questions for an hour. If you think it went well, you haven't spent any quality time around a 14-year-old recently. But I got $100, which I spent on books and props in the dealer's room. If you've read my short story, The Trade, from my book, Just a Geek, you now know that I learned nothing about negotiation and money management between the ages of 8 and 14. When I went to work the following Monday, some of the Star Trek veterans who had originally asked us about cons let me know how badly I'd been conned. They put me in touch with people who could arrange for me to travel all over the country to a different city each weekend to promote Next Generation, meet fans, and tuck a little money away for college, or maybe even a house one day, or spend on props in the dealer's room. Conventions were different in the late 80s from the way they are now. That one company called Creation is using licensing agreements with Viacom and exclusivity agreements with actors to force just about all of the regional promoters out of the market. Back then, there were as many convention promoters as there were Holiday Inns around the country that were willing to host a few hundred Trekkies for a weekend. And every single con had its own unique feeling and fan base. I remember going to a convention in Philadelphia with my mom. She got food poisoning. I don't remember a thing about the convention, but I can still see and feel the waiting area in the emergency room. Dark wood on the walls, old magazines on the tables and chairs, ugly white and yellow linoleum tiles on the floor. I spent the entire night playing Tetris on the Game Boy and listening to the Final Cut on my Walkman, trying not to be too freaked out that my mom was in a hospital and we were 1,000,000 miles from home. 1,000,000 was the default value for a lot. When I was 18 or 19, I learned that even if the microphone really looks like a magic wand massager, it's really not the smartest thing to tell the audience, wow, I'm talking into some kind of marital aid. Especially when you're at a convention in the middle of the Bible Belt. I remember flying to New Jersey to do a convention with Marina Sirtis and playing head-to-head Tetris on our Game Boys the entire flight. I had a massive crush on her back then. And though the thought crossed my mind for most of the trip, I didn't have the courage or the nerve to suggest a round of strip head-to-head Tetris. In my 16-year-old mind, it totally would have happened. Once in Oklahoma, I was a guest at a dinner where I sat with a few other Star Trek actors while some Boy Scouts served us. The menu had barbecued chicken, barbecued beef, and barbecued bologna.
Boy Scouts.
Wait, I remember asking the kid who was about the same age as me, barbecued bologna?
Boy Scouts.
Yes, he said. It's center cut. Neither one of us knew what that meant. But I had grown up white trash enough to know that bologna was not something that I wanted to eat, especially if it was barbecued. Problem, however, was that barbecued bologna was something of a local delicacy, and I was seated at the head table. It seemed like every barbecued bologna-loving eye in the hall was watching to see what I did. I ate it, pretended to like it, and until I wrote this paragraph, nobody was the wife. Once at LostCon in Pasadena, right after I got my driver's license and my first car, a totally bitchin' 1989 Honda Prelude SI 4WS, which was one step better than Patrick Stewart's, was therefore the subject of much backstage teasing. He still brings that up. Really, Patrick? Let's compare our careers. Excuse me, I'm gonna go get in my Honda and drive away now. Patrick used to say at conventions that after that he went and bought the most expensive Jaguar he could afford so that I could never catch up. Anyway, at this convention in Pasadena, I met my very first science fiction idol, Larry Niven. The meeting went something like this. Me. Oh my God, you're Larry Niven. Niven. Oh my God, you're Wesley on Star Trek. Oh, what? Oh, can I have your autograph? Oh, yes! Oh, cool! I still have the copies of Ringworld and Ringworld Engineers that he signed. Yeah.
Awesome!
Luck of Tila Brown for the wins. They weren't all good times, of course. While most of the cons were fantastic, run by guys who really cared about fans and wanted them to have a good time, others were pretty awful. run by complete crooks who wanted to take the fans' money and get out of town before anyone figured out what they were up to. There are a couple of guys who still owe a lot of fans and actors money that we'll never see. One of those guys, in the pre-internet days, convinced 15-year-old me that it was a short drive from Amarillo to Denton, Texas. Those of you with your iPhones might want to pull up Google Maps to get the full impact. Not having the good sense to look on a map for myself, I agreed to do 2 different cities in 2 different days. As the drive across Texas entered its 3rd hour without a single recognizable sign of civilization other than Dairy Queen and Stuckey's, I learned an important lesson about not ever trusting anyone. On countless occasions, a promoter would tell fans that one of us was coming to the show. They would take the fans' money, and then they'd claim that we canceled at the last minute. Of course, the only time any of us ever heard about the show was when the irate fans wanted to know why we backed out of it and demanded a refund from us. For you damn kids today who have always had email and the internets and cell phones, it may be hard to picture a world where a Game Boy was high-tech, but that's where I came of age. The world seemed bigger than it does today, and from time to time, I miss driving straight from Paramount to LAX on Friday after work and falling asleep on the red-eye somewhere over New Mexico, still wearing Wesley Crusher's helmet hair. It was a lot of work to travel the country every weekend, and over the years, the holiday inns all bled together like a smear of Sharpie ink across the heel of my left hand after a marathon autograph session. But there were many more good times than bad. It was fun to see so many different places and people, all united by their love of this thing that I was lucky enough to be part of. Until the whole, all Wesley, die thing. There are still a few regional gaming cons, and comic cons, and Linux cons, and cave cons every year, but not many pure Star Trek conventions anymore, as far as I can tell. Part of it has to be the economics and how hard it is to complete the creation, but I also blame the powers that be for making several years of sucktastic Trek that wasn't worth watching, much less traveling to a Holiday Inn to celebrate. I know, heresy, but feel free to set me on fire. Actually, you know what? Don't. Over the last couple of years, I've begun attending conventions again, but now I go mostly as a fan. I'm glad that I stopped going to cons exclusively for work, because otherwise I don't think I would have ever remembered how much fun they are when you're just there to geek out. Those of us who will cram 13 of our friends into a hotel room for a weekend to tell awful puns and watch anime have a place to go where we will not only be not laughed at. Did I really write that? No, actually I wrote it correctly. Have a place to go where we will not only not be laughed at for dressing up, but encouraged to do it, except for the furries. In fact, when the annual Grand Slam convention was held in Pasadena, practically my backyard, in 2006, I only spent 1 day there as a guest, signing autographs and posing for pictures. It was Sunday, typically a slow day for any convention, and I just didn't feel like sitting at my little table when there was so much cool stuff going on around me. So I packed up my pictures and my books, trucked it back to my car, grabbed my camera, and did something I haven't done for years. I walked around the Grand Slam convention purely as a fan. I listened to astronauts talk about doing for real what I used to do for fakes, which was nothing new for me. I've had the great fortune to meet and talk with several different astronauts over the years, but it's always something that I will never take for granted. These guys have been telling the same stories for nearly 40 years, but whenever they talk about blasting off or looking back at Earth from orbit, they recreate those moments with such clarity and passion that they could have just stepped out of the capsule after splashing. When they were finished, I walked over to the dealer's room for a bit of shopping and reminiscing. At one point, I walked past a booth that had lots of classic Star Wars toys. My eyes fell on an original model of Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. I had that toy when I was a kid, and just looking at it was like this car commercial that was running at the time, where a guy would touch a car and get this rapid-fire burst of images until he took his hands off of it. I saw myself riding in the car to Kmart with my parents, hoping to buy a new Star Wars toy, running around the backyard in fading evening light in the summer of 1980, racing my TIE Fighter through the air. I piloted my TIE Fighter, chasing my brother who piloted a snow speeder. We weren't afraid to combine Star Wars and He-Man, so why not combine Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back? The same universe. I know I only stood there and looked at it for a few seconds, but it felt like several minutes. I like it when that happens. I restrained myself in ways that were not possible before I had a family to support, and bought myself only one thing, a little keychain that said geek on it, which is really silly. That's like an athlete wearing a thing that says athlete. Oh, hi LeBron James, I noticed that your keychain says basketball player. Play basketball? Then I headed over to the main auditorium to listen to Ron and Moore. This isn't in my book, but I just had lunch with Jamie Bamber. I know. I knew Ron was coming to the show because I'd read it in his blog the night before, and I hoped that I'd get a chance to talk with him one-on-one. But I didn't expect that I'd run right into him backstage minutes before he went on. He lit up when he saw me. My prepared speech about how I didn't know if he remembered me from 15 years ago flew out of my head. As he closed the distance between us, some of the things he did for my character flashed through my mind. Yesterday's Enterprise. The first time I got to do something really different on the bridge. The first duty. The first and only time we saw Wesley interact with his peers, act his age, and witness his on-screen humanity. And Journey's End. The first and only time we saw Wesley as an adult, willing to take a principled stand against his father figure, Captain Picard. I felt a surge of emotion well up in my chest. Before I knew the words were coming out of my mouth, I said, "We worked together on Next Generation when I was too young and too immature to appreciate what you gave me as an actor and what you did for my character. I know it's 15 years late, but I wanted to thank you." He smiled warmly. "Thank you," he said. "It really means a lot to me to hear that." I wanted so badly to tell him how I'd do anything in the world to be on Battlestar Galactica. But I couldn't think of a way to say it without totally spoiling the moment. So I just congratulated him on his success and asked him if he had as much creative control as he wanted. "I do," he said. "I'm very lucky to work with great people, and the network is very supportive of what we want to do. Of course, we battle, but there are always good battles that make the show better." He was called onto the stage before we could talk any longer, and as he stepped through the curtain to absolutely deafening applause, I felt happy. I've discovered that all I want to do as an artist, whether it's acting or writing, is create something that matters to me. That's true for all the artists I know, particularly the writers, who are all way more insecure than they should be. Like Joss Whedon, Ron has done that, and I felt happy for him. In that weird I was just talking to you backstage before you went on stage when the crowd went nuts. When Ron was done, I headed out of the convention for some lunch. When I came back into the hall, someone said to me, "Jonathan Frakes was just talking smack about you on stage." I instantly knew that Jonathan told the "you used to be cool" story. If you don't know what this story is, here's the short version. When I was like 16, I thought Jonathan was the coolest guy in the world. He was like everything I wanted to be. He was like an adult, and he had a beard. He was just cool. So we're walking out one night after work. We were walking back to the parking garage, and we were parked next to each other. And I always tried to do that. I was trying to park my cars next to the other actors' cars, so like maybe I could hang out with them a little bit on the way back after we were done work. And we were walking back together, and he was talking about jazz. He had just introduced me to Miles Davis. He had given me Kind of Blue. Like I got it, and it really like mattered to me. And we were talking, And as we're on our way to the car, I said, you know, man, I can tell just by looking at you that you used to be cool. Of course, what I meant was, I bet that when you were my age, you were as cool as I wish I was. He has never let me in. This happened 20 years ago. And every time I see him, he says, hey, W, I bet you used to be cool. And he tells this story on stage at conventions all the time. You know, Wheaton once told me that I used to be cool. So, I laughed out loud and wished there was some way I could stop time long enough to visit with him before I left to pick up my kids. I found Jonathan backstage and I said, I can tell just by looking at you. He said that you used to be cool. He wrapped his arms around me and hugged me. W, he said, it is so great to see you. You too, I said. Are you on your way out or are you hanging around? He said. I gotta go pick up my kids, I said. How are they? They're great. They're teenagers now, you know. He chuckled and shook his head. We are so old. There's another story in Just a Geek where I saw Jonathan, and it's the first time I'd seen him in years, and it was Jonathan and Brent and Patrick. And I'm sitting in the room, we're about to go on stage together. You know that bit from Sesame Street where like, there's like the checkerboard, and they're singing the song like one of these people doesn't belong? It was me.
Like the others.
Somebody made a mistake. I'm not Michael Dorn. So Jonathan looks at me and he says, how old are you? And I forget how old I was at the time. I was like 25 or 26. And he says, oh my, do you know how old that makes me? And so I said, yeah, like, what are you, 30? And then Patrick comes in and he says, look at Wheaton. He's gotten older, we've just gotten fatter. He chuckled and he shook his head. Man, we are getting so old. I always look for that impish glint I loved when we worked together. It was still in his eye. Are you well? He asked. Mostly, I said. You? I'm great, man. We talked as long as we could about kids and houses and Star Trek and work and wives and all those things that I could never have talked about when I was younger. I just adore Jonathan Frakes, if I haven't made that clear. And I was genuinely sad when I saw that I had to leave to pick up my kids. I gotta go, Johnny, I said. And I hope that it won't be a year again before I get to see you, but I'm pretty sure it will be. It's been over a year. You look great, W, he said. Then he pointed at this huge screen that made up the back of the stage where Avery Brooks was talking about his time as Captain Sisko, but not as good as Avery. Avery Brooks did look great. He looked cooler than Shaft and more stylish than anyone else in the convention hall. He is seriously fucking up the cool crew for us, isn't he? Oh, I was supposed to censor that. He's really messing up the cool crew.
Awesome.
I'm sure you're offended.
Sure.
Really be offended? Don't worry, W, he said with a grin. I can tell just by looking at you that you used to be cool. You too, I said. Star Trek has changed a lot in 20 years, and so have the conventions. But one thing remains unchanged in 2 decades. As a speaker and as a fan, taking that Friday red-eye sounds like a pretty